Have you ever noticed how the moment you feel like giving up on English is often the same moment your relationship feels tired, quiet, and heavy? This video is not just about learning English slowly in America. It is about one difficult week in my own love story here in the United States, misunderstandings, silence, small words said wrong, and small words that saved us. If you feel stuck, exhausted, or ready to quit, this story may sound uncomfortably familiar. The question love asks. There is a question that usually appears when you are most tired, not when things are loud and dramatic, but when everything feels quietly heavy. It sounds simple, almost harmless, yet it can stop you completely. The question is this: why am I still trying? Last week in the United States, that question followed me everywhere, into my relationship, into my marriage, and strangely, into my English practice as well. You wake up in the morning, and nothing is technically wrong. The coffee machine works. The sky looks normal. Your partner says, "Good morning," but the voice feels distant, like it traveled through too much air before reaching you. You nod. You smile. Inside, your brain is already tired. This is usually the same moment people stop practicing English. Not because English is hard, but because their emotional battery is empty. Psychologists call this emotional depletion. When your emotions are overloaded, your brain starts cutting unnecessary activities first. Guess what it considers unnecessary? Slow listening. Careful speaking. Trying to find the right words, in English or in love. Your nervous system is not lazy. It is protective. It is basically saying, let's survive first. We can learn later. Last week, my relationship felt like that. Nothing exploded. No big fight. Just a series of small misunderstandings. A text read too quickly. A sentence answered too shortly. In English, we call this reading between the lines, but when emotions are involved, your brain reads lines that were never written. The same thing happens when you listen to English while stressed. You hear sounds, but your mind adds fear on top of them. That I noticed something uncomfortable. When I felt disconnected from my partner, I also avoided English. I skipped listening practice. I postponed speaking. I told myself I was busy. In reality, I was protecting myself from feeling stupid, misunderstood, or not enough. The same feelings that quietly visit a relationship under pressure. Neuroscience explains this clearly. Stress reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for language processing, empathy, and self-control. In simple words, when love feels shaky, your English will feel shaky too. Not because you are bad at either, but because your brain is overwhelmed. So here is the honest truth I learned last week. The question, why am I still trying, is not a signal to quit. It is a signal to slow down. In relationships, slowing down sounds like listening without fixing. In English, it sounds like listening without translating every word. The question love asks is not cruel. It is diagnostic. It tells you where you are exhausted, not where you are incapable. And once you understand that, quitting no longer feels logical. It just feels like misdiagnosis. 7 days in America. 7 days do not sound like much. 1 week is something people usually waste without noticing. But last week in the United States, those 7 days felt unusually long, like time decided to slow down just to make sure I noticed everything I normally avoid. The quiet tension in my relationship. The pauses in conversation. The way English sounded harder when my heart felt heavier that it started on a Monday. Not dramatically. No arguments. Just a small moment at the kitchen counter. My partner asked a simple question, and I answered too quickly. Not wrong. Just rushed. You know that tone, efficient, emotionless, technically correct. The same tone you use when you repeat an English sentence perfectly but feel nothing while saying it. That tone stayed with us all day. When you live in America, English surrounds you constantly. Signs. Emails. Casual, how are you? Questions that are not really questions. Last week, I noticed how often I responded on autopilot, both in my relationship and in English. I'm fine. It's okay. Short answers. Safe answers. Answers that end conversations instead of opening them. By Wednesday, the silence grew heavier. Not angry silence. Tired silence. The kind that makes you question whether speaking is even worth the effort. This is exactly when most learners quit listening practice. They press play, hear a few sentences, and suddenly feel annoyed, bored, or restless. That reaction is not about the audio. It is about emotional overload. Research on cognitive load shows that when your brain is emotionally preoccupied, its capacity to process new language drops significantly. In simple terms, your mind is already full. So every English word feels louder, heavier, more irritating than it should. Last week, I felt that in my relationship too. Every small comment felt bigger than it was. One evening, we sat on the couch, phones in hand, saying nothing. I played an English video quietly, more out of habit than motivation. The words entered my ears, but my mind stayed somewhere else. This is a common mistake in language learning, listening without presence. It looks like practice, but it does nothing. That night, I realized something uncomfortable. I was treating my relationship the same way. Physically present. Emotionally elsewhere. And just like English, love does not respond well to half attention. Thursday and Friday passed like this. Polite. Functional. Slightly cold. In American culture, people call this being busy. In reality, it is emotional avoidance wearing a productivity costume. You tell yourself you will fix things later, your English, your relationship, your motivation, when life becomes easier, but life rarely becomes easier on its own. By Sunday, I understood the lesson of that week. 7 days were enough to show me that both English and love fade not because of conflict, but because of neglect disguised as exhaustion. When you stop showing up slowly, intentionally, consistently, distance grows without asking permission, and distance, once noticed, always asks the same question: when did we stop trying? Love under pressure. Pressure does not usually arrive as chaos. It arrives as compression. Everything becomes smaller, tighter, harder to breathe in. Last week, the pressure in my relationship did not come from a big problem. It came from many tiny ones stacking quietly on top of each other, like unread messages in your mind. And under that pressure, both love and English started to behave strangely. there was a moment midweek when my partner said something ordinary. No accusation. No sharp words. Just a comment about timing. Yet my body reacted as if I had been attacked. My shoulders tightened. My reply became defensive. This is a classic stress response. When the nervous system feels overloaded, it shifts into protection mode. Logic steps aside. Listening becomes selective. Tone matters more than meaning. The same thing happens when you try to speak English under pressure. You know the words. You have practiced them. But the moment you feel judged, even by yourself, your mind goes blank. This is not a lack of knowledge. It is cortisol, the stress hormone, interfering with working memory. Studies show that high stress reduces verbal fluency and comprehension, even in your native language. Last week, I watched this happen in real time. In my relationship, I stopped hearing what was actually said. In English, I stopped trusting what I already knew. Everything felt fragile. One wrong word, and something might break. Pressure also distorts time. A 5-minute conversation feels like an hour. A short English exercise feels unbearable. Your brain wants relief, not growth. So it suggests escape. Scroll your phone. Change the topic. Skip practice today. You tell yourself you will return when you feel better, but here is the quiet truth pressure hides. Avoidance does not reduce pressure. It redistributes it. The unsaid words stay. The unpracticed English accumulates. And the weight increases slowly, invisibly. One evening, I caught myself choosing silence instead of clarity. Not because I did not care, but because I cared too much and felt too tired to do it well. This is a dangerous place in any relationship. Silence feels safe, but it creates distance. In language learning, silence does the same thing. You stop speaking to avoid mistakes, and fluency drifts further away. Psychology calls this learned restraint. After repeated emotional strain, the brain limits expression to conserve energy. It is efficient in the short term and destructive in the long term. Love needs expression. Language needs output. Without them, both become theoretical instead of lived. Pressure does not mean something is wrong. It means something matters. Last week taught me that pressure is not a signal to stop. It is a signal to adjust the pace, lower the stakes, and stay engaged. When love is under pressure, whisper instead of shout. When English feels heavy, slow down instead of quitting. Pressure does not break what is flexible. It only breaks what refuses to bend. When we misunderstood. Misunderstanding is rarely loud. It does not announce itself. It slips in quietly, wearing familiar words with unfamiliar meanings. Last week, the most painful moment in my relationship was not a fight, but a conversation where we both thought we were being clear, and somehow walked away feeling more alone than before. It started with a sentence that sounded harmless. Something practical. Something about plans. I heard criticism. My partner heard indifference in my response. Neither of us intended either meaning. Yet our brains filled the gaps instantly. This is what humans do under emotional stress. We stop listening to words and start listening to threats. The same mechanism sabotages English learners every day. You hear a sentence, miss one word, and your brain panics. It invents meaning. Usually the worst possible one. I don't understand anything. They speak too fast. I will never sound natural. In relationships, the invented meaning sounds like, you don't care. I am not important. This is going nowhere. Neuroscience explains this beautifully and brutally. When emotional safety drops, the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, takes control. It prioritizes speed over accuracy. In other words, your brain would rather be wrong quickly than uncertain slowly. That is a terrible strategy for both love and language. Last week, I noticed how fast I reacted. No pause. No clarification. No simple question like, what do you mean? In English learning, this is the moment you stop the audio instead of replaying the sentence. You exit instead of staying curious. You choose certainty, even painful certainty, over understanding. There is a concept in communication psychology called repair attempts. These are small efforts to fix a misunderstanding before it becomes a story. A smile. A softer tone. A clarifying sentence. In language learning, repair looks like repeating a sentence slowly, checking a word, or allowing silence before responding. Simple actions. Powerful effects. That evening, we almost missed the repair. The conversation was ending. The distance was settling in. Then something small happened. I said, slowly, I don't think we're talking about the same thing. No blame. No explanation. Just a pause. That pause changed everything. That in English practice, pauses are uncomfortable. Silence feels like failure. But silence is where processing happens. The brain needs time to integrate sound, meaning, and emotion. Rushing destroys comprehension. So does rushing love. When we slowed down, the misunderstanding became obvious. We were answering different questions. Protecting different fears. Once named, the tension softened. Not disappeared. Softened. That matters. Misunderstanding is not proof of incompatibility. It is proof of speed without alignment. Last week reminded me that clarity does not come from speaking better. It comes from listening longer. In English, understanding improves not when you hear more words, but when you give fewer reactions. In love, connection returns not when you explain more, but when you assume less. Most people do not fail because they misunderstand. They fail because they never stop to check. What the brain does. Your brain does something very specific when emotions rise too high. It does not become dramatic. It becomes economical. Last week, as my relationship moved through tension and repair, I could feel my brain switching modes without asking for permission. Less curiosity. Less patience. More shortcuts. This is not a personality flaw. It is biology doing its job a little too well. When emotional stress increases, the brain reallocates resources. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reasoning, language, empathy, and long-term planning, loses priority. Energy is redirected to areas focused on survival. That is why, under pressure, you struggle to find the right English word or the right loving response at the same time. Your brain is not broken. It is overprotective. Cognitive psychology calls this cognitive narrowing. Attention shrinks. Options disappear. You start thinking in binaries, right or wrong, stay or quit, speak or stay silent. In English learning, this shows up as perfectionism. If you cannot say it perfectly, you say nothing. In love, it shows up as emotional withdrawal. If you cannot explain yourself clearly, you retreat. Last week, I noticed how quickly my brain labeled situations as too much. Too much emotion. Too much effort. Too many words. This is exactly when learners say, "I will practice tomorrow." Tomorrow feels safer because it is imaginary. Today demands presence. Neuroscience research shows that slow, low-stress repetition is the most effective way to build language fluency. The same principle applies to emotional connection. Intensity does not create depth. Consistency does. Your brain learns best when it feels safe enough to make small mistakes without punishment. One night, after a long conversation, I tried a simple experiment. I listened to a short English clip, less than 2 minutes. No pausing. No translating. Just listening. My brain resisted at first. Then it softened. This is called habituation. When the threat level drops, the brain reopens learning pathways. The mistake most people make is waiting for motivation. Motivation is a byproduct of safety, not a prerequisite. When your nervous system calms down, motivation follows naturally. That is true for relationships and for language learning. Understanding what the brain does under stress removes shame. You stop calling yourself lazy or incapable. You start adjusting conditions instead of blaming character. Lower the difficulty. Shorten the time. Reduce emotional stakes. Your brain does not need pressure to grow. It needs permission. And once it feels safe, progress resumes quietly, almost invisibly. One gentle English moment. Change did not arrive as a breakthrough. It arrived as something almost embarrassing in its simplicity. One gentle moment. One small decision that looked too weak to matter. Last week, that moment happened on a quiet evening when neither my relationship nor my motivation felt particularly strong. That we were sitting at the table, tired but calmer. No agenda. No fixing. Just shared space. I opened my phone and played a short English audio, slow, clear, almost childlike. Not to study seriously. Not to improve dramatically. Just to listen together. This mattered more than it sounds. Why? Because the brain associates context with safety. When learning happens in a calm, emotionally neutral environment, retention increases. Studies in affective neuroscience show that positive or low arousal emotional states improve language acquisition more effectively than high-pressure practice. In simple terms, your brain learns better when it does not feel tested. The audio played softly in the background. No subtitles. No stopping. I did not explain anything. I did not try to sound smart. I just listened. My partner listened too, half interested, half relaxed. English became background music instead of a problem to solve. this is where most learners get it wrong. They treat English like a performance instead of a presence. Something you must do correctly, loudly, and visibly. But language, like love, grows best when it is allowed to exist quietly before it is asked to perform. After the audio ended, I repeated one sentence out loud. Slowly. Imperfectly. No correction followed. No judgment. That silence was important. Silence tells the nervous system, you are safe here. In relationships, silence after honesty builds trust. In language learning, silence after speaking builds confidence. That one sentence stayed with me longer than any intense study session. Not because it was special, but because it was unforced. The brain encodes unforced repetition more deeply than effortful struggle. This is called implicit learning. You absorb patterns without consciously chasing them. The same principle repaired something subtle between us. No emotional speech. No resolution. Just shared calm. Presence without demand. A gentle English moment does not look productive. It looks lazy to people who equate effort with pain. But progress does not require suffering. It requires consistency without fear. If you feel stuck, do less. Shorter audio. Slower speech. Lower expectations. Let English sit beside your life, not compete with it. Sometimes one quiet sentence does more than 1,000 loud intentions. Love learns slowly. There is a dangerous myth that quietly ruins both relationships and language learning. The myth says that if something is real, it should come naturally. Effort means failure. Slowness means something is wrong. Last week reminded me how untrue that belief is. Love, like language, does not arrive fully formed. It is learned. And learning, by definition, is slow, repetitive, and slightly awkward. I noticed this clearly in my relationship. When things were tense, I wanted resolution immediately. One conversation. One explanation. One perfect sentence that would fix everything. That urgency felt logical, but it was actually impatience disguised as care. The same impatience shows up when you want to speak English fluently now, not after months of small, boring practice. Psychology has a term for this: process intolerance. The brain dislikes gradual progress because it is hard to measure emotionally. Big changes feel rewarding. Small changes feel invisible. But invisible change is where real learning happens. Language research consistently shows that spaced repetition, short, repeated exposure over time, builds stronger neural connections than intensive bursts. Love follows the same rule. One calm check-in every day does more than one dramatic conversation a month. One sentence spoken gently every evening does more than an hour of stressed practice once a week. Last week, I stopped trying to fix the relationship. I started showing up slowly. Listening a little longer. Speaking a little softer. In English, I did the same. I repeated simple sentences. I allowed pauses. I accepted imperfection. Something subtle shifted. Not excitement. Stability. Stability is underrated because it does not feel like progress. But stability is what allows growth to continue without collapse. Neuroscientists explain this through neuroplasticity. The brain changes through repeated, low stress exposure. High emotion can create memories, but it does not build skills reliably. Skills are built quietly. Love learns your tone before your words. English learns your rhythm before your vocabulary. When you slow down, both have time to settle into your nervous system. That if you are frustrated with your English, ask yourself how you treat things you love. Do you rush them? Test them? Threaten to quit when they disappoint you? Or do you stay, even when progress feels invisible? Love that lasts is not intense. It is patient. Language that sticks is not dramatic. It is repeated. Slow does not mean weak. Slow means sustainable. An unfinished story worth telling. Some stories do not end with clarity. They end with continuity. Last week did not resolve everything in my relationship. There was no cinematic apology, no perfect understanding, no moment where all tension disappeared. And that is exactly why the story matters. That we often believe that a story is only worth telling if it is finished, fixed, successful. But real love, like real language learning, rarely offers clean endings. It offers progress that can only be seen when you look back slowly. By the end of the week, something had changed, not dramatically, but structurally. The pressure softened. The silence became less threatening. English returned to its place in my life, not as a task to conquer, but as a companion to daily experience. I listened more. I spoke less, but more honestly. I stayed. Psychologists talk about narrative identity, the way we understand ourselves through the stories we tell. When you label a chapter as failure, your brain looks for exits. When you label it as unfinished, your brain looks for continuation. That distinction matters more than motivation. In language learning, people quit not because they cannot learn, but because they decide their story is over. I'm not good at English. Full stop. In love, people do the same. We don't understand each other. Period. Stories end where curiosity ends. Last week reminded me that curiosity is an action, not a personality trait. You choose it when you replay a sentence instead of stopping the audio. You choose it when you ask one more question instead of withdrawing. You choose it when you accept that progress today might look boring. Neuroscience supports this. The brain stays engaged when outcomes are open-ended. Unfinished tasks hold attention better than completed ones. This is known as the Zeigarnik effect. An unfinished story keeps the mind invested. That is why this week mattered. It did not close a chapter. It kept it alive. That if you are watching this while feeling tired, of English, of love, of trying, this is not a sign to quit. It is a sign that your story is still in motion. Still learning. Still becoming. English does not need your confidence. It needs your presence. Love does not need perfection. It needs your willingness to stay in the conversation. Some stories are worth telling not because they are impressive, but because they are unfinished, and you are still inside them.